The frost came early that year, and it came hard. By the second week of October, the puddles along the Wexley road had a skin of ice on them each morning, and the hedges wore a dust of white until near noon. The apples that were left on the trees had gone soft and brown, and the crows made a great noise about them. Petra Ashwell felt the cold through the thin soles of her boots as she walked, and she thought, not for the first time, that she ought to have mended them before the season turned. But there had been other things to mend first. There were always other things to mend first. She had been to the village on an errand for her father. He was the curate at Little Wexley, and he had needed a small pot of ink and a quire of paper. And Petra had said she would go because the walk was pleasant even in the cold, and because her mother had been coughing again and did not need to be sent out. So Petra had gone, with a basket over her arm and 3 shillings in a folded handkerchief in her pocket, and she had bought the ink and the paper, and she had bought a paper twist of barley sugar for her little brother, because he had been good about his sums that week, and now she was walking home. The wind smelled of wood smoke and turned earth, and the sharp cold smell that meant more frost by morning. Petra pulled her shawl closer. She was thinking about nothing in particular, only that her nose was cold and her feet were colder, when she came around the bend by the old stone bridge and saw the woman sitting on the milestone. The woman was old. That was the first thing Petra saw. She was old and she was tired, and she had a great basket at her feet that was piled so high with things it seemed a wonder she had carried it at all. There were parcels wrapped in brown paper on the top, and beneath them Petra could see the green leaves of a cabbage and the pale ends of 2 loaves of bread. The woman's bonnet was plain and dark, and her cloak was plain and dark, and her hands, folded in her lap, were red at the knuckles from the wind. Petra slowed. She had been raised to slow down for such things. Her father had a saying, which he had taken from a book, but had made his own by saying it so often, that a person who walked past trouble was a person who would one day sit down beside it. So Petra stopped. "Are you well, ma'am?" she said. The old woman looked up. Her face was thin and lined, and her eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale and clear. She smiled a small smile that seemed to cost her something. "I am well enough," she said. "Only I have walked farther than I meant to, and my basket has grown heavy since I sat down." Petra looked at the basket. Then she looked at the road ahead. It was a long road. She did not know where the woman was going, but she knew there was nothing between here and the next village but 3 miles of open field, and one very small cottage where the Marshes lived, and the Marshes were not the sort of people who would carry an old woman's basket for her. "Where are you bound?" Petra asked. The old woman named a place Petra had heard of, but had never seen. It was called Coldhaven, and it lay on the far side of the parish, past the woods and past the long slope where the sheep were kept in summer. It was, Petra guessed, another 2 miles at least. The old woman would not make it before dark, not carrying that basket, not with those hands. Petra set her own basket down on the milestone. She had made her decision, though she had not known she was making it. "I will carry it for you," she said, "as far as your door." The old woman's pale eyes went sharp for a moment, as though she were looking at Petra in a new way. Then she softened. "That is a long way, child, it is not so far," said Petra, though it was. "And my father will not mind. He would mind more if I left you." "You have a good father, then, I have," said Petra, and she bent and lifted the basket. It was heavier than she had expected. She nearly grunted, and only kept from it because her mother had taught her that a lady did not grunt, not even when she was not being watched, because habits were made in the moments no one was looking. She shifted the basket to her hip and offered the old woman her free arm. "Can you walk, ma'am?" "I can walk," said the old woman, and she rose slowly, as though her knees hurt her, and took Petra's arm. They set off along the road toward Coldhaven. The frost had not yet melted in the shadow of the hedge, and Petra could see her breath and the old woman's breath making pale ghosts before them as they walked. The old woman did not talk much at first. She seemed to be conserving what strength she had. Petra did not press her. She only walked, and shifted the basket now and then when her arm grew tired. and thought about how she would tell her father that she had been late because a woman had needed her, and how her father would say only that it was well done and would pass her the butter. After a mile or so, the old woman spoke. "What is your name, child?" "Petra, ma'am. Petra Ashwell." Ashwell. The old woman turned the name over in her mouth as though tasting it. "The curate's daughter. You know my father. I know of him. He has a reputation for kindness. It travels." Petra flushed a little at that, though she did not know why. She said, "And your name, ma'am, if I may?" The old woman was quiet for a step or two. Then she said, "You may call me Mrs. Merrow, Mrs. Merrow. It is a pretty name." "It is a name," said Mrs. Merrow, and she smiled her small smile again. They walked on. The sun, what there was of it, sat low and orange on the tops of the far hedges. Petra's arm ached from the basket, and her fingers were numb where they curled around the handle, but she did not say so. She talked about small things instead. She told Mrs. Merrow about her little brother, whose name was Rowan, and who was 7, and who had learned that week to spell the word conscience without help. She told her about the barley sugar in her pocket. She told her about the pot of ink and the quire of paper, and how her father was writing a small book of sermons that no one would read but that made him happy to work at in the evenings by the fire. Mrs. Merrow listened. That was what Petra noticed most. She listened as though what Petra said mattered. And she asked one small question now and then, and she let Petra fill the silences without hurrying her. It was, Petra thought, a rare kind of company. At the top of the long slope the wind picked up. Petra shifted the basket again, and felt something inside it shift too, something heavier than bread, something wrapped in cloth. She did not look. It was not her business what was in the basket. But she thought, in passing, that Mrs. Merrow's marketing was a strange sort of marketing. "Not far now," said Mrs. Merrow, when they reached the top. She pointed down the slope with a thin hand. "The lane that turns off by the yew tree. That takes us in." "In where?" said Petra. Mrs. Merrow looked at her sideways. "Home." They turned off at the yew tree. The lane was narrow, and the ruts were deep with frozen mud, and Petra had to walk carefully to keep from turning her ankle. The hedges here were higher than her head, and she could not see beyond them. She could hear rooks somewhere overhead, and the wind in the top branches of the yews, and once, faintly, the sound of a horse. The lane went on longer than she expected. She began to wonder if Mrs. Merrow had misjudged her strength after all, and if they would still be walking when the light failed. She thought about her mother, who would begin to worry, and her father, who would not worry yet but would look at the door. Then the lane opened. Petra stopped without meaning to. Before her, across a wide sweep of gravel, stood a house. It was not a cottage. It was not a farmhouse. It was a great grey stone house with tall windows and 2 wings that stretched out on either side of a heavy front door, and there were stables to one side, and a garden with a wall around it to the other, and a fountain in the middle of the gravel with the water frozen in a queer curled shape where it had been coming down. Petra looked at Mrs. Merrow. Mrs. Merrow was looking at the house with the expression of a person who is coming home. "Ma'am," said Petra, very slowly. "This is Coldhaven?" "This is Coldhaven. You live here?" "I do." Petra did not know what to say. She looked down at the basket in her hand. She looked at Mrs. Merrow's plain dark cloak, and her plain dark bonnet and her red knuckles. She thought, this cannot be. And then she thought, of course it can. A woman may dress plainly and live in any house she likes. Mrs. Merrow patted her arm. "Come," she said. "You will not turn back now, having carried it so far. Come inside and warm yourself. There will be tea." "I cannot, ma'am. I must go home." "My father, your father would be a poor Christian to send you back into the cold without warming you first. Come, 10 minutes, no more if you do not wish." Petra hesitated. Her feet were very cold. The road home was 3 miles. The sky was already the color of a bruise. She said, 10 minutes. They crossed the gravel together. A man came out from the stables and took a step toward them, and then stopped very short, as though he had seen a ghost. He touched his cap. "Ma'am," he said, We did not know when to expect you." "You did not need to know," said Mrs. Merrow. "This young lady has been kind enough to see me home. Her name is Miss Ashwell. She will take tea before she goes. See that her father is sent word she is safe, and will be brought back in the carriage." "The carriage," said the man. "The carriage." "Yes, ma'am." He touched his cap again and went, quickly toward the house. Petra stared after him. Then she stared at Mrs. Merrow. "Ma'am," she said. "What who inside first?" said Mrs. Merrow gently. "Explanations are warmer indoors." The front door was opened before they reached it. A tall, thin woman in a black gown stood in the doorway with her hand on the door, and when she saw Mrs. Merrow, her face did a thing that Petra had never seen a servant's face do. It softened and tightened at the same time, as though she wanted to weep and would not permit herself. "Your Grace," said the tall, thin woman. Petra's fingers loosened on the handle of the basket. She caught it again before it fell, but only just. Mrs. Merrow, who was not Mrs. Merrow, did not look at Petra. She said, "Mrs. Halliday, this is Miss Ashwell. She has carried my marketing from the bridge at Little Wexley. Please see that she has tea and that she is warm, and please tell my son that I am home and that I will speak to him presently." "Yes, Your Grace." The tall, thin woman stepped aside. "Mrs. Merrow, the Duchess." Petra thought, "Oh dear God, the Duchess," went past her into the hall. Petra did not move. "Come, child," said the Duchess, without turning. Petra came. She did not know what else to do. The hall was very large and very warm. There was a fire in a fireplace that Petra could have stood inside without stooping, and the smell of applewood smoke was in the air, and beneath it the smell of beeswax from the polished floor, and beneath that, faintly, the smell of orange peel, as though someone had been making a pudding. Petra set the basket down on the flagstones because her arm would not hold it any longer. Her hand shook a little. Your Grace," she said. "I did not know. I would not have, I am so sorry I called you Mrs. Merrow. You called me Mrs. Merrow because I told you to." "But, Petra," the Duchess turned to her at last. Her pale eyes were very kind and very tired. "You did nothing wrong. You did something very right. Sit." There was a bench along the wall. Petra sat. The Duchess sat beside her. She took off her plain dark bonnet and set it in her lap. Without it she looked older and also somehow younger, as though the bonnet had been a weight. "I walk out sometimes," she said. "I go into the market at Wexley when the mood takes me, and I wear this cloak, which belonged to my old governess, and I carry a basket, and I do my own errands. It is a foolish thing, perhaps, but it is my foolish thing, and my son permits me it, because he understands. Today I went farther than I ought. I am not so young as I was. When I sat down on the milestone, I thought I might have to send a boy to the house for the carriage, and then a girl came around the bend." Petra could not speak. "You did not know me," said the Duchess. "You could not have known me. You saw an old woman who was tired, and you stopped. You carried a basket that you did not need to carry, for 2 miles, for a stranger. In a wind that took the feeling out of your hands. I watched you shift it from one arm to the other, and never once complain. I asked you your name, and you told me. I asked you nothing else, and you filled the silence with your brother and your father and your barley sugar. Do you know what that is, child?" "No, ma'am. Your Grace. It is a kindness that does not know it is a kindness. It is the rarest thing in the world." Petra looked at her hands. They were red at the knuckles now, like the Duchess's had been. "I only did what my father would have done," she said. "Yes," said the Duchess. "That is exactly what you did, and that is why." There was a sound in the hall then, of a door opening somewhere at the far end, and of a step that was heavy and unhurried. Petra looked up. A man was coming toward them. He was tall. He was not classically handsome, though Petra could not have said quite why not. His face was too grave for pretty, his mouth too still. He wore a dark coat and no waistcoat of any colour she could see, and his hair was the colour of wet bark. He walked as though the floor belonged to him, and he was reasonably content with the arrangement. He looked at his mother first, and something in his shoulders eased that Petra had not known was tight. Then he looked at Petra. Petra understood in the space of one breath. The Duke. He was very much the Duke. He stopped in front of them. He said, "Mother, Callum," said the Duchess. "Sit down. You are looming." He sat on a chair opposite them, and he did not stop looking at Petra. "This is Miss Ashwell," said the Duchess. "She has carried my basket from the bridge at Little Wexley. I told her my name was Mrs. Merrow. I did not tell her otherwise until we were on our own steps. She is here for tea before she is taken home, and you are not to frighten her." "I do not intend to frighten her," said the Duke. His voice was quiet and low, and it fitted him as his coat fitted him. He turned his heavy gaze on Petra. "Miss Ashwell, thank you." "You are welcome, Your Grace. You did not know." "No, Your Grace. That is the point," said his mother. He did not smile, but something at the corner of his mouth moved a very small amount. He said to Petra, "You are cold." "A little. Come by the fire." She came by the fire. He did not offer her his arm. He simply walked to it and stood by it and waited for her, and when she came he stepped a little aside so she could have the warmest place. He did it as though he were placing a chair for the housekeeper, not for a young woman. It was, Petra realized with some surprise, the least performing thing a man had ever done for her. The tea came. It came on a silver tray with 3 cups, and there was bread and butter and a small dish of preserved plums, and Petra ate 2 slices of bread and butter before she remembered that she had meant to be polite and eat only 1. The Duke saw her notice and did not remark on it. He passed her the plums. "My mother," he said, "has been walking to Wexley for 3 years in that cloak. In 3 years no one has ever offered to carry her basket." "No one," said Petra, before she thought. "No one. That cannot be right." "It is right." Petra thought about that. She thought about the road at Little Wexley on a market day, and about how many people walked it, and about how many of them saw an old woman in a plain cloak and thought nothing. "They did not know who she was," she said at last. "No," said the Duke. "They did not. That is worse, not better." The Duke looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his mother. His mother was drinking her tea and pretending not to hear. "Yes," he said, "it is worse, not better." They talked of ordinary things after that, or the Duchess did, drawing Petra out about her family and her father's book of sermons, and her brother's spelling. The Duke said little. He watched. Petra was aware of it and tried not to be aware of it. Her cheeks were warm from the fire and from something else, and she was glad when the housekeeper came in at last and said the carriage was ready. The Duke rose. So did his mother. "You will come again," said the Duchess. "Your Grace, you will come again. On Sunday, after church. My son will send the carriage. Tell your father I asked it, and that I will not take a refusal from a curate whose reputation is kindness." Petra opened her mouth. She closed it. She said, "Yes, Your Grace." The Duke walked her to the door. He handed her into the carriage himself, which the coachman had clearly not expected, because the coachman moved twice to do it and stopped both times. At the door of the carriage the Duke paused. "Miss Ashwell." "Your Grace." "Your boots." She looked down at her boots. "They were wet and thin and shameful in this hall. They will not carry you through the winter." "They will do, Your Grace." He looked at her. He did not argue. He simply closed the carriage door and stepped back, and the carriage went. That was the first day. 3 days later a parcel came to the curate's house at Little Wexley. It was addressed to Miss Petra Ashwell, and it was tied with plain string, and when Petra opened it she found a pair of boots. They were good boots, made of soft dark leather, with thick soles and small brass buttons up the side. They fit her exactly, which meant that someone had measured. which meant that the housekeeper at Coldhaven, who had seen her wet boots by the fire, had done it with her eye. There was no card with the boots, there was no note. Petra sat on her bed and looked at them for a long time, and then she went and told her father, because she did not know how not to. Her father turned the boots over in his hands. He was a slow, careful man with grey hair and spectacles, and he did not speak until he had thought. "You cannot send them back," he said. "That would be a rudeness." "But, Papa, but you may write and thank her." "Not him. Her. And you may say, if it eases you, that you accept them in the spirit in which they were given, which is the spirit of a lady who has decided you shall not walk to church in wet boots this winter." "You think it was her, then, I think," said her father, "that the note was left off precisely so you would think it was her. Which tells you a great deal about him." Petra thought about that. She wrote the letter. She wrote it to the Duchess, and she thanked her plainly and briefly, and she said the boots were the finest she had ever owned, and that she would wear them to Sunday service with a grateful heart. She did not mention the Duke. She sealed the letter and gave it to the boy who brought the milk to take up to the great house, and she did not think of it again for 2 days. On Sunday the carriage came. It came at 2:30, as promised, and Petra was ready, wearing her best gown, which was 3 winters old, and her new boots, which were not. Her mother had wept a little at the sight of her, and then had told her not to be silly and to sit up straight. Her father had walked her to the carriage door, and had said only, "Be yourself, Petra." That is what she asked for. At Coldhaven the Duchess received her in a small warm parlour at the back of the house, where a fire was burning, and where the smell of orange peel and clove was in the air again. The Duke was not there. Petra sat and had tea, and the Duchess asked her about the sermons her father was writing, and about her mother's cough, and about whether Rowan had learned any new hard words that week. She asked as though she truly wanted to know. After a while the Duke came in. He did not stay long. He said, "Mother, Miss Ashwell." He bowed. He looked at Petra's boots, a single brief downward glance, and then he looked away and did not remark on them. He sat for perhaps 10 minutes, and he asked Petra one question, which was whether her father's book of sermons might be found in the subscription library at Wexley when it was done, and he listened to her answer, and then he rose and said he had business with his steward, and left them. The Duchess watched him go. Then she looked at Petra and said, without expression, "He is not always so silent." "He is a duke, ma'am. He is entitled." The Duchess laughed. It was a real laugh, small and surprised. "You are a wonder, child. I am not, your grace. I am only tired of pretending." "Yes," said the Duchess, still smiling. "That is what I mean." Petra came again the Sunday after, and the Sunday after that. She did not always see the Duke. When she did, he spoke little and asked one question and left. But she began to notice things. She noticed that on the 3rd Sunday there were fresh flowers in the small parlour, and that the flowers were the kind that grew in the physic garden behind the house. She had glimpsed the garden from a window on her first visit, and had asked what it was, and she noticed that the housekeeper had begun to leave a plate of the preserved plums out, because Petra had eaten them the first time. She noticed that no one at the great house spoke to her as though she were a curiosity. They spoke to her as though she had always been coming to Sunday tea. On the 4th Sunday the Duke came in and stayed. He sat down opposite her. He said, "My mother has been called upstairs. She will be some minutes." He paused. "You may leave, if you prefer to wait for her elsewhere." "I do not prefer to leave, your grace." He looked at her. He looked at her for a long moment, as though weighing something. "Good," he said. The fire made a small settling sound. Somewhere in the house a clock struck 3. Petra could hear a horse being led across the gravel outside, its hooves clean and sharp on the stones. The whole world for a moment seemed to slow down. She was aware of her own breath, and of the tea cooling in her cup, and of the way the light from the window fell in a pale slant across the carpet between them, catching a piece of thread that no one had noticed and picked up. The Duke said, "You have never asked me for anything." "No, your grace." "Why not?" "Because I have not needed to ask you for anything." You needed boots. I did not ask you for those, Your Grace. You gave them. Yes. He was quiet a moment. Do you know how I knew the size? Mrs. Halliday, she saw them by the fire. That is what my mother said you would guess. Was it not Mrs. Halliday? It was Mrs. Halliday, I asked her. He looked at his hands. But I asked her because I could not stop thinking about the way your feet must have felt in those boots at the bridge at Little Wexley, and I could not decide whether to send new ones or to be ashamed of myself for noticing, and in the end I did both. Petra did not know what to say to that. So she said nothing, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had decided, without saying so, that they need not fill it. The Duchess came back then, and the moment passed. But it did not quite. The next week Petra was in the village with her mother when she saw the man from the stables, the one who had said the carriage in that startled way on the first day. He was standing outside the smithy holding a horse, and when he saw her he touched his cap, and she nodded, and she walked past. Her mother said, "Who was that?" "One of the Duke's people. He knew you. He has seen me at the house." Her mother said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Petra, Mama, does he speak to you? The Duke? A little. Only a little? He is not a talkative man." Her mother stopped walking. She turned Petra to face her. She was a small woman with tired eyes and a strong mouth, and she said, "Petra Ashwell, listen to me. Whatever this is, and I do not know what it is, you must not let yourself be made a fool of. Do you hear me? Yes, Mama, he is a duke. Yes, Mama, you are a curate's daughter. Yes, Mama, then I do not need to say any more." No, Mama, but her mother did say more, in a different way that night. She came into Petra's little room after supper and sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I did not mean to frighten you today. Only I have seen young women think themselves lifted up when they were only being played with. I would not have that be you." "Mama, he has not. He does not. He has never said anything to me that he could not say to Rowan. That is what worries me, Petra. Men do not send boots to girls they have nothing to say to." Petra was quiet. Her mother kissed her forehead and went away. The next Sunday Petra almost did not go. She sat in her room with her new boots on her feet and her shawl over her arm. And she thought about her mother's warning, and she thought about the Duke's face when he had told her about the boots, and she thought about what her father had said about being herself. In the end she went. She could not have said, if asked, whether she went because she wanted to see him or because she was too proud to stay away. Both, perhaps. At the house the Duchess said, "You look tired, child." "I am not tired, Your Grace. You are troubled." "I am not troubled." Petra sat down. She said, "My mother is worried, Your Grace. She is afraid I will be." She stopped. She could not say the word. "Made a fool of," said the Duchess gently. "Yes." The Duchess set down her tea. She said, "Petra, look at me." Petra looked. "My son is not a man who makes fools of women. He is a man who has been made a fool of himself. Once. Badly. And he does not forget it. He is careful. He is slow. He is, sometimes to a fault, a man who would rather send a pair of boots and say nothing than say anything, and be misunderstood. I tell you this not because I wish to arrange anything, but because I wish you to know what you are looking at when you look at him. Do you understand me? I think so, Your Grace. Good. The Duke did not come to tea that day. But when the carriage was called, he came to the front door to see her out. He said nothing. He handed her in. As he closed the door, he said, without looking at her, "Miss Ashwell, Your Grace, tell your mother she is right to be careful. Tell her I said so." The carriage went. Petra sat in it and could not, for a long moment, feel the seat beneath her. Winter came in properly then. The frost that had come early kept coming, and the ponds froze thick enough to walk on, and Petra's father caught a cold that turned into something worse. And for 2 weeks Petra did not go to Coldhaven at all, because she was needed at home. She wrote a short note to say why, and by return a basket came, a very ordinary basket tied with plain string, with a jar of honey and a paper of black tea and a small parcel of dried figs. And no card. Petra did not need the card. She gave the honey to her father, who ate it with a spoon out of the jar because he was too tired to be genteel, and it helped. When her father was better and could sit up and read again, Petra went back to Coldhaven on a Sunday. The Duchess embraced her, which was new. The Duke was in the hall when she came in, and he looked at her for a long moment as though checking her over for damage, and then he said, "Your father is well?" "He is better, Your Grace." "Thank you. And your mother's cough?" "It has not returned this winter." "Good." He did not mention the basket. Neither did she. But when she went in to tea, the Duchess said, "Callum sent that himself, you know. He would not let the housekeeper. He wrapped the figs on the kitchen table like a schoolboy." "Mother," said the Duke from the doorway in a warning voice. "I am telling her because you will not, and because she ought to know," said his mother, and she poured Petra a cup of tea without looking up. The Duke did not deny it. He came in and sat down and, after a moment, said the figs were poorly wrapped. "I make no defence of the wrapping." Petra laughed. It surprised her. She had not laughed at Coldhaven before. He looked at her when she laughed, and something in his face, not a smile, not quite, moved. That was the winter she began to understand what she was looking at when she looked at him. The trouble came in February. There was a woman in the county named Lady Aurelia Vane. She was a widow, and she was rich, and she had been, 3 years before, the woman the Duke had almost married. He had not married her. The reasons were his own and were not spoken of at Coldhaven. But Lady Aurelia had not forgotten. She had watched, and she had waited, and when word came to her that the Duke of Coldhaven was calling regularly upon a curate's daughter from Little Wexley, she came to see for herself. She came on a Sunday. She did not send word. She arrived at Coldhaven at 2:30 in a great carriage with silver on the harness, and she walked into the small parlour as though she owned it, and she stopped when she saw Petra. "Oh," said Lady Aurelia. "The girl." Petra rose. She did not know why she rose. She would have risen for any lady coming into a room, and Lady Aurelia was very much a lady. Her gown was the colour of ripe plums, and it fitted her as though it had been sewn upon her that morning, and her hair was arranged in a way that must have taken 2 hours, and she smelled of a perfume that Petra could not name, but could feel in the back of her throat like a piece of dust. The Duchess said, "Aurelia, I did not expect you." "No," said Lady Aurelia, "I imagine not." She came into the room. She sat down without being asked. She looked Petra over from the top of her plain brown hair to the toes of her good boots, and her mouth did a small, terrible thing. "Miss Ashwell, I understand," she said. "The porter's daughter. The curate's daughter, ma'am." "Ah, the curate's. I stand corrected." She smiled. "It is very generous of the Duchess to receive you. She has always been a woman of unusual charity. She once had a blind beggar to tea, you know. He ate 3 biscuits and asked for a 4th. Petra sat very still. The Duchess said, "Aurelia, I mean no unkindness," said Lady Aurelia, without taking her eyes off Petra. "I only wish the girl to understand her position. She has been carrying a basket, I hear. It is a charming story. I have told it 3 times this week. Everyone laughs. They say the Duke has taken to collecting strays as his mother collects beggars, and that there is now a girl at Coldhaven on Sundays who does not know which fork to use and looks at the Duke as though he had descended from a cloud. It is very charming. It cannot last, of course. But it is charming while it lasts, and I am sure Miss Ashwell will remember it fondly when she is once again carrying baskets on the Wexley Road." The room was quiet. The fire ticked in the grate. Somewhere far off in the house a door closed. Petra looked down at her hands. They were folded in her lap. They were not shaking. She was surprised to find that they were not shaking. She lifted her eyes. "Lady Vane," she said. Her voice was small but steady. "I do know which fork to use. My mother taught me. She taught me also that a guest does not insult another guest in the house of a lady she has come uninvited to visit. Perhaps your mother did not teach you the same. I am sorry for it." Lady Aurelia's face went white and then red. The Duchess did not move. But her mouth had done the small tight thing it had done the day Mrs. Halliday saw her come home. "Well," said Lady Aurelia at last. "Well, I think," said the Duchess, in a voice like glass, "that you will be wanting your carriage, Aurelia." Lady Aurelia rose. She rose slowly, as one rises when one has been struck and does not wish to show it. She said, "Duchess, Miss Ashwell." She swept out. Petra sat in her chair. She did not weep. She did not tremble. She only sat. The Duchess reached across and took her hand. "Well done," she said, very quietly. "I should not have. You should have. And you did. Do not spoil it now." The door opened. It was the Duke. He looked at his mother, and his mother looked back at him, and something passed between them that did not need words. Then he looked at Petra. "You heard," she said. "I heard the end of it. I was in the hall. I am sorry, Your Grace, that in your house do not," he said. "Do not apologize for her, or for yourself." He came into the room. He did not sit. He said, "Miss Ashwell, Your Grace, would you walk with me? In the physic garden. It is cold, but the wind has dropped." "Yes, Your Grace." They went out through a side door. The garden lay behind the house, walled in old red brick, with beds of dead-looking plants that were only sleeping, and gravel paths, and in the middle a small stone bench under a leafless tree. The air smelled of damp brick and rosemary, and the sharp mineral smell of frost on stone. The Duke walked slowly. Petra walked beside him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. At the bench he stopped. He did not sit. He said, "I have been slow." "Your Grace, I have been slow, Miss Ashwell. I have known for some time what I intend, and I have said nothing because I did not wish to frighten you, and because I did not wish to be wrong about myself, and because a man who has once made a mistake of this kind is careful not to make another. But Aurelia has forced my hand today, and I find I am not sorry." Petra held very still. Her breath came out in a small pale cloud. "I have not spoken to your father yet," he said. "I will not, if you do not wish me to. If you wish me not to, we will go on as we have been, and I will send figs badly wrapped for the rest of your life, if that is all I am permitted, and I will count it a fair bargain. But if you will hear me, Miss Ashwell, I will hear you, Your Grace." He looked at her. His face was very grave, and his heavy gaze was on her, and he said, "I have watched you carry a basket for a woman who was not your mother. I have watched you speak the truth to a woman who was trying to break you. I have watched you laugh at a badly wrapped parcel of figs when you might have laughed at me instead, and I have watched you not laugh at me when I gave you every reason to. I do not know a great many things. I do not know how to be a light man, or a clever one, or a man whose company is easy in a drawing room. But I know that I would like to spend the rest of my life in the company of a woman who carries baskets for strangers, if you will let me. If your father will let me. That is all I have to say." Petra found that her hands were shaking now. She had not shaken in front of Lady Aurelia, but she was shaking now. "Your Grace," she said. Take your time. I do not need it. I did not think," my mother said. "Your mother was right to be careful. I told you so. You did. She may be less careful now if she likes." Petra laughed then, and the laugh turned into something not quite a sob, and she put her hand over her mouth. The Duke waited. He did not touch her. He simply waited, as he had waited on the doorstep the first day for her to come by the fire. At last she took her hand away. "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, Your Grace. You may speak to my father." He let out a breath. It was the first thing about him, in all these months, that had been anything less than perfectly composed. "Callum," he said. "Your Grace, my name, when we are alone." "Callum, Callum." Yes, they stood in the physic garden in the cold for a little longer. He did not kiss her. He did not take her hand. He only stood beside her, and after a moment he offered his arm and she took it, and they walked back to the house together very slowly, as though the gravel might break if they hurried. The Duchess was in the hall when they came in. She looked at them. She did not ask. She said only tea, I think, is called for. They had tea. He spoke to her father that week. Her father listened, in his slow, careful way, and asked 3 questions, and got 3 answers, and at the end he said, "You understand, Your Grace, that she is not a bargain. She is a person. If ever you forget that, I will remind you, Duke or no Duke." "I will not forget, sir." "Good." Her mother wept, and then laughed at herself for weeping, and then wept again, and then made a very great fuss about which of Petra's gowns could possibly do for anything, and then sat down and said, "Oh, Petra," and did not weep again but held her daughter's hand for a long time. Rowan was told last, because Rowan could not keep a secret. When he was told, he thought about it seriously for a full minute and then said, "Will there be pudding at your house?" "Every day, if you like," said Petra. "Every day," said Rowan, with the deep satisfaction of a boy who has been vindicated in a long-held philosophy, and he went out to tell the cat. They were married in the spring, in the small church at Little Wexley, because Petra would not be married anywhere else, and her father performed the service, though his hands shook a little on the book. The Duchess sat in the front pew in a gown the colour of a dove. Rowan carried the ring on a small cushion, and did not drop it, which he had been practising for 3 weeks. Lady Aurelia Vane did not come. She was not invited. She sent, some weeks later, a letter of stiff congratulation which Petra read once and put away, and never mentioned again. Coldhaven changed slowly after that. Not all at once. That was not Petra's way, and it was not Callum's. But a person coming to the house in the 2nd year of their marriage would have noticed, without quite being able to say why, that the small parlour had more flowers in it than it had used to, and that the physic garden had been mended and planted, and that there was a shelf of books in the library now that was not the old books but new ones, a little book of sermons among them, in a plain grey cover that had been printed at last, and that was read by more people than the writer had ever dared to hope. The housekeeper, Mrs. Halliday, walked with a lighter step, and the tall, thin sadness that had lived in her face at the front door on the first day was gone. One afternoon in the 3rd autumn, a dry autumn, this one, with the leaves turning without rain and the light going gold on the fields, Petra was walking home from the village of Little Wexley. She had been to see her mother, and she had a basket over her arm with a jar of her mother's plum preserves in it, and the road was the road she had walked 100 times, only now she walked it in good boots that had been resoled twice, and that she would not, on any account, replace. She came to the stone bridge. She stopped, as she always stopped, and looked at the milestone. There was an old woman sitting on it. Petra's heart did a small, quick thing. Then she looked again. It was not the Duchess. It was another old woman, in a plain dark cloak, with a basket at her feet piled too high with parcels and bread. The woman looked up when Petra stopped. Her eyes were tired. Her hands were red at the knuckles. "Are you well, ma'am?" said Petra. "I am well enough," said the old woman. "Only I have walked farther than I meant to." Petra set her own basket down on the milestone. She smiled. "Where are you bound?" The old woman named a farm 2 miles up the road. Petra thought about it for perhaps half a second. Then she bent and lifted the woman's basket, and she offered her free arm, and she said, "It is not so far. I will walk with you." The sun was low. The light on the road was the colour of honey. Somewhere behind her, at Coldhaven, Callum would be looking at the clock and would not, she knew, be worried yet, and when he heard why she was late he would not be surprised, and he would say only, in his quiet way, that he had married a woman who carried baskets, and that he ought by now to have grown used to it. She smiled at the thought, and shifted the basket to her hip in the old familiar way, and set off up the road with a stranger on her arm, and the first stars showing pale in a sky that had not yet decided to be night.